Hello and welcome, my little Cheshires, to another flamboyantly stylish episode of What Happened, the show that takes a closer look at video games, movies, and etc. with fractured or prolonged development life cycles. And really, there are few games in the last decade that have exhibited those two elements more than Platinum Games' latest action spectacle. From long bouts of silence to a high-profile exit to, of course, a very public bit of voice acting drama, our story today is rather notorious. So grab your tastiest lollipop and put on your most opulent pair of glasses, because it's time to find out what happened to Bayonetta 3.
You have my deepest sympathies.
Back during the dark ages of the Wii U, Nintendo was keen to get their hands on any exclusives they could, and with Platinum Games' Sega partnership having run its course, they were quick to snap up Bayonetta 2 as an exclusive, and as we all remember, everyone on the internet was extremely cool with that. The game didn't perform all that well on the Wii U, with the only confirmed number being 300,000 units in its first 9 weeks, but aside from the game briefly getting shelved by Sega, its development appears to have gone relatively smoothly, with Nintendo and Platinum Games reportedly getting along very well, despite clear differences in the types of games that they make. However, despite Bayo 2's critical acclaim, a third entry for the series wasn't immediately in the cards, and would obviously be skipping the Wii U given the state of the Wii U. Thankfully, this didn't mean Platinum Games and Nintendo weren't working together anymore. In spite of the colossal financial failure of some of their other Wii U projects, they were in fact already planning their next big team-up. It just wasn't Bayonetta. The following information about the inner workings of both Platinum Games and Nintendo's relationship around this time graciously comes from Imran Khan, who agreed to share various bits of information from multiple sources close to the project. For those not familiar with Imran, he's a former senior editor at Game Informer who was the first person who dropped some exclusive info regarding Bayo 3 on his Patreon a few weeks back, link in the description below. He helpfully prefaced his statements to me by saying, "This timeline is to the best of my knowledge, with information I've gotten from people close and directly involved with development on the game. It's as accurate as I know it, but no one source knows everything, and even me trying to aggregate sources might have missed something here or there. All information should have an implied, as far as I know, before it. Either way, I hope this is helpful." As per his findings, Nintendo had asked Platinum Games for a brand new action IP to usher in the Switch, the criminally underplayed Astral Chain, which, according to Imran, started off quite differently as well. Platinum Games originally envisioned it as a medieval fantasy title before Nintendo stepped in and suggested they instead adopt a futuristic sci-fi aesthetic, as they felt it would better suit the game. If this is the decision that gave us Lappy and collecting sweet babies, then it absolutely 100% was the right one. While that was going on, Nintendo also tasked Platinum Games with a side mission, making a Switch port of both Bayonetta games, which would free Bayonetta 2 from the confines of the Wii U graveyard. What? Nintendo porting Wii U games very few people played over to the Switch? Why, that positively sounds like it was just time. Figuring since Nintendo was already asking for more Witch time, Platinum Games decided to shoot their shot and pitch Bayonetta 3 sometime early in this porting process, and Nintendo promptly agreed. The publisher then announced this with the quickness which typically goes against their usual MO, and prepped a trailer for the 2017 Video Game Awards, which, aside from a logo, showed very little. This is because that's literally all that existed of the game at this point in time. Imran's sources stated that all Platinum Games had was some concept art and a story treatment by Kamiya, so the trailer had to make do with minimal assets. While Hideki Kamiya was the director of the first game, he would take on a role as a supervisor for Bayonetta 2 and 3, with Yusuke Hashimoto taking the director's chair for both. Platinum Games had at the time been exploring more open, free-roaming structures in Nier Automata, Scalebound, and Astral Chain, and Hashimoto felt this could also be a good direction to take Bayo, with titles like Breath of the Wild and Batman Arkham City as inspiration. This had actually been hinted at publicly later on in 2019, when Platinum Games CEO Atsushi Inaba described a different development process for the game in an interview with VGC. With Bayonetta 1 and 2, we had basically an orthodox development process, at least for us. We did stage 1, then stage 2, then stage 3, and built up all the drama and pacing chronologically. For Bayonetta 3, we can say that we learned enough from making the past two games to change our process in a way that's different to what I just described. While Inaba played coy when the obvious follow-up questions came regarding whether this was referring to the game's structure or just the title's development, the dates line up, and I'd be willing to hazard a guess that he was indeed teasing some form of a more open structure. But wait, you're thinking, Bayonetta 3 isn't open world at all. What happened? Well, that's what we're going to find out. The team plugged away on the game's new, more open nature in relative silence through 2018 and into 2019, but that's precisely when the first tiny setback for Bayonetta 3 occurred. Its director suddenly quit the company. In early 2019, Hashimoto took to Twitter, saying, "This tweet will be a little more personal than usual. Yesterday, January 31st, this tweet was posted February 14th, was my last day at Platinum Games. The memories I made during my 13 years at Platinum, working with dozens of talented individuals on Bayonetta, Bayonetta 2, and Star Fox Zero, are priceless to me. Let me take this opportunity to share my thanks with anyone who has worked with me, supported me, or played my games. I hope to take the experiences I gained at Platinum and use them on whatever I work on in the future. Thank you again." Now, neither Nintendo nor Platinum Games ever officially detailed to the public who was actually working on Bayo 3 at that time, so this news largely went unnoticed by the majority of casual fans. He wound up returning to his old stomping grounds at Capcom and landed a designer position on Street Fighter 6, which he formally announced in February of 2022. But let's jump back to February 2019 and back to Platinum Games, where they were left with a very unfinished game with no director. Thus, another Yusuke, this time Miyata, was chosen to helm the ship, which was not a bad choice, as he had already worked on both Astral Chain and The Wonderful 101 as a designer himself. Hideki Kamiya shifted to a more hands-on role to better help the project as an executive director, with their plan being to continue with his and Hashimoto's original desire for an open-world game. However, according to Imran sources, this proved to be a lot more difficult than originally thought. The team was grappling with both design issues, such as properly pacing out the adventure, and technical problems related to the open world. The Switch is a great little machine, but it's no mystery that for a game with the level of fidelity that Bayonetta 3 is pushing, it's going to be a struggle to get everything running perfectly, and even the much more linear final version puts the Switch through its paces. Now, I'm just assuming here, but squeezing in all those over-the-top effects and fancy new rendering techniques alongside the 60 FPS target the franchise is famous for in an open-world setting was probably a very hefty challenge. After trying to tackle all these issues well into 2020, Nintendo finally stepped in once again and advised Platinum on how best to proceed. They suggested ditching the open world concept altogether and instead focus what they had built into a more straightforward level-based structure. The game had already been in development for 2+ years with very little to publicly show for it, and instead of taking a gamble on the open world concept that was clearly struggling, retooling the game back into a more familiar mold was deemed the best course of action. Thus, several levels were condensed or split apart. You can see some evidence of this in a few of the game's maps, with the Isle of Thule being the most obvious. It's frankly pretty easy to imagine a version of the game with a more interconnected Thule map, where the portals fork off into various stages of the game like a bicycle wheel. Now, this is just guesswork on my part, but typically when you take resources like levels and retrofit them for another purpose, you might start to run into problems with performance. What might seem simple to shrink a game down to run better doesn't really work that way when everything made up until that point was designed with a completely different purpose in mind, so this could have contributed to some of the visual and performance issues the final game exhibited, but we don't really know for sure until someone cracks open all the source files to check. But with the game's design and structure now in the middle of taking a huge shift, it really wasn't a great time to start publicizing Bayo 3 and putting out trailers or screenshots. But by summer of 2021, fans were obviously getting a little antsy. And it's not like Platinum Games hadn't already gone dark on a few previous projects, only for them to get cancelled. Oh hey, look at that. But this endless speculation from fans obviously grated Hideki Kamiya's proverbial cheese. He reacted to these pleas for info in an interview with VGC in the summer of 2021, where he said, "I understand it's driving the fans crazy. In light of that, my suggestion would be that maybe we should all reset and forget about Bayonetta 3. Then, when something finally does happen, it will be a nice surprise, won't it?"
Someone seems very interested in our arrival.
As a quick sidebar, that's honestly a good bit of wisdom when waiting for any video game. No use frothing yourself into a tizzy over no news. Anyway, the internet obviously agreed and collectively forgot about Bayonetta 3 and absolutely did not mock his comment. But that's precisely when the aforementioned nice surprise finally did happen. In a regular, everyday September Nintendo Direct, when after 1,386 days of abject silence, we had our first real look at Bayonetta 3, showing off gameplay, cutscenes, and the promise of a 2022 release date. There was just one tiny area of concern. Eagle-eared fans of the franchise noticed a particular change. Bayonetta's voice actress was a completely different person.
Does anyone mind if I cut in? Wouldn't want to step on anyone's toes.
Honestly, since this part of our tale went down not even too long ago, and I assume most of you probably already know it, I'm still gonna give you a condensed version of the events, because I can't imagine the state of my comments section if I didn't at least touch upon it. In early October, just a few weeks out from Bayonetta 3's release date, Platinum Games confirmed that Helena Taylor, the original voice actress for Bayo in the first two games and her other appearances, would not be returning to the role, something the game's director, Miyata, announced via an interview with Game Informer. Various overlapping circumstances made it difficult for Helena Taylor to reprise her role. We held auditions to cast the new voice of Bayonetta and offered the role to Jennifer Hale, whom we felt was a very good match for the character. I understand the concerns some fans have about the voice change at this point in the series, but Jennifer's performance was way beyond what we could have imagined. I'm confident that her portrayal of Bayonetta will exceed our fans' expectations. Of course, some fans understandably grumbled about this change, but it's not completely unheard of, and honestly, winding up with Jennifer Hale as your lead is certainly no bad thing. The bad thing did happen 10 days later, where Helena Taylor took to Twitter and aired out a lot of dirty laundry, accusing Platinum Games of lowballing her with an insulting $4,000 offer to return to the role, which would indeed be ludicrously low for a leading character in the third game of a franchise. She also made the claim that Bayonetta was a series valued at over $450 million in revenue before merchandising, which seems a bit off considering the first two games combined have sold maybe 3 to 3.5 million copies at best, so the math never really checked out there. She asked fans to boycott the game and instead give their money to charities, later suggesting one that's an anti-abortion group. Okay. Regardless, a huge number of fans still took the accusations very seriously and proceeded to hound Hideki Kamiya, who Taylor mentioned by name, and Platinum Games in general, whereupon Kamiya was quick to block the last few remaining people in the world he had not already blocked. He then didn't do many favors for himself by tweeting a single statement which read, "Sad and deplorable about the attitude of untruth. That's what all I can tell now. By the way, beware of my rules," before completely deactivating his Twitter account for a time. He came off as he was really pissed, but things had only just started.
I see his motto is still act first, think later.
Just 3 days later, Bloomberg's Jason Schreier received documentation and several corroborating accounts that alleged Taylor's version of the events left out a lot of critical info. She was initially offered $15,000 or possibly more to return to the role via a minimum of 5 4-hour recording sessions. This was about triple the minimum amount that SAG voice actors are required to be paid for voice roles. She turned this down and counter-offered for 6 figures and residuals, which, considering the amount of recording time she was contracted for, would be an unusually high number in the industry. Platinum Games declined this counteroffer and opted to just recast Bayonetta entirely. They did, however, offer Taylor a cameo role in the game, which would only require one session and pay out the same rate as one of the 5 individual sessions previously offered at $4,000. Taylor rejected this as well, and then simply walked away. Once this report was published, she claimed that it was a lie and stood by her story, until she didn't. On October 24th, she took to Twitter once again, saying that she never asked for 6 figures, but did admit that Platinum Games had offered her a larger initial sum, which she did turn down, corroborating that bit of the Bloomberg piece. Jennifer Hale had also been on the receiving end of Twitter harassment, despite not being fully aware of the circumstances behind the scenes that had allowed her to get the role. She did put out her own statement. As a longtime member of the voice acting community, I support every actor's right to be paid well and have advocated consistently for this for years. I am under an NDA and I am not at liberty to speak regarding this situation. My reputation speaks for itself. I sincerely ask that everyone keep in mind that this game has been created by an entire team of hardworking, dedicated people, and I hope everyone will keep an open mind about what they've created. Finally, I hope that everyone involved may resolve their differences in an amicable and respectful way, which was a statement supported by Platinum Games, who themselves offered a similarly plain but clear statement. So, with the tide now very quickly turning, Helena Taylor seemed to want to distance herself from the controversy she herself had stirred up, saying to Bloomberg, "I would like to put this whole bloody franchise behind me and, quite frankly, get on with my life in the theater." And that wasn't a snide joke or anything, by the way. It lines up with earlier tweets she had made about how she was done with video games and was planning to refocus on the theater anyway. While the whole situation was rather ugly, it did briefly bring up the legitimate issue of voice actors getting their fair share for iconic roles in successful franchises. And while Platinum Games did seem to go above and beyond the standard pay model, lots of other actors in the industry are not so lucky. In spite of the multi-million-dollar successes enjoyed by lots of big franchises, actors, and indeed the vast majority of staff, rarely ever see a dime in royalties. Many voice actors shared their past experiences in this regard, saying that disputes like this happen all the time, but typically behind closed doors. It's unfortunate that Taylor's case muddied the waters about the greater conversation. While she most likely blacklisted herself from the entire voice acting industry in the process, at least more people are now aware of the issue. The lack of royalties paid out to development and voice staff on big projects continues to be a frustrating reality in this day and age. And in this case, considering this was the 3rd game in a series and a very recognizable character, Helena wasn't out of line to at least ask for the royalty part of her counteroffer. Regardless of her calls for a boycott, the controversy didn't seem to concretely affect Bayo 3's return to the commercial arena. It cracked the top 10 of the NPD sales charts for October after only being on sale for 2 days in the tracking period, a feat that the franchise had never managed to accomplish before. It's a promising start, and when you consider that pretty much every major Nintendo release on Switch has leapfrogged previous non-Switch entries in sales, Bayo 3 is poised to be the biggest success in the franchise. Unfortunately, the aforementioned graphical and performance hiccups did mar the game's otherwise sublime action gameplay, with several big outlets, most notably Digital Foundry, shining a light on its technical shortcomings. And now, just recently, Hideki Kamiya started talking about a 4th Bayonetta, saying specifically that they would follow up on Bayo 3's ending, which was something some fans took issue with. But since it seems like this is very much a vanity franchise that they use to help placate their hardcore audience and not necessarily make a ton of money, I think there's still a good chance it could sashay into a future Nintendo Direct. Let's just hope it won't take nearly as long and be with much less controversy.
If all this effort doesn't make for a happy ending, I'll have some harsh words for that girl.
A massive thanks goes out to Imran Khan for sharing all his info, and do check out his Patreon if you're looking for weekly news and reviews straight from a trusted source. And if you know of any other games or movies that took a long time to make, shout them out in the comments below or over on my Twitter. See you next time, Cheshires, and thanks for watching.